All right, folks, so we're going to learn a brand new topic today called loops. We saw this back in the day with our robots, but now we're going to learn how to do it in Visual Basic. So that means that our objective for today is to learn how to use a for loop, that's a specific type of loop, to repeat sections of code. So we're going to learn about for loops. A couple of announcements. I might have just said this out loud, but just so you know, this is the last week for the previous quarter, so you must finish any late or makeup assignments or anything that you have like that must be done before the weekend. Okay? And just so you know, I know you guys are getting a little lax with your vocabulary sheets. I'm going to be collecting that at some point next week, so make sure that you are up to date on that. And you should start right now by taking out your vocabulary sheet online, or on the computer that is, and taking notes to this lecture. All right, so here's the plan for today. We'll start with talking about loops just in general and introducing you to the topic, and then we'll learn the specifics of for loops, and then we will hit up an example and also learn how to debug while we do that. It's a big topic today. All right, so loops in general. So most programming languages, in fact, almost all of them except for the lowest level ones, have some sort of loop function, okay? And we learned it when we did the robots back in the day. A loop is just a section of code that gets repeated over and over again, right? You might remember this symbol from when we used the robots. Okay, this was a loop, right? As a piece of code, anything that went inside that loop got done over and over and over again. And if you recall, this particular loop was a loop to infinity. Right, you can see the infinity right there because that loop kept going continuously, right? But we could have other things in here like loop until the sensor detects this thing, or loop until you bump into somebody, right? And so we're going to learn about all different types of loops like that infinity loop or conditional loops like that. Now we're going to learn all about it. All right, so some loops repeat for a specified number of times, right? Repeat this action 5 times would be an example. And you could do that with the Legos, right? You could make it go around the circle 3 times. Okay, but some other loops, we can have some sort of condition that decides how long the loop goes for. So some loops repeat until something happens. So you could say, all right, loop this robot, make it go in a circle until its ultrasonic sensor sees something, or something like that, right? So there's lots of different types of loops, and we're going to start in Visual Basic by learning the for loop. It's a classic loop, and you're going to find this in most of the major programming languages. So here we go with the for loop. In VB, Visual Basic, this is the most, in my view, the most versatile type of loops. Okay, this is actually my favorite. I don't really use any other types of loops because I just like these a lot. And here's how it works. Okay, so you start by writing the word for, right? It's called a for loop, F-O-R. Okay, and then we have this thing called the counter variable. Then we say equals, and then we say low to high. And I'm going to explain what all this means in a second. And then at the end, right, you know how we always have if and end if, or we have select and end select, or function, end function. For a for loop, we say for, and at the bottom we say next. Okay? And then anything that goes inside this loop is the stuff that goes and happens over and over and over again. Okay, so that's how it's going to be set up. We're going to start with for. We're going to have a next at the bottom. We're going to have a bunch of stuff over here, and I'm going to explain what this is in a second. But anything that comes between the for and the next, we call the loop code. That's the code that's going to happen over and over again. So let me show you how it's used. Let me give you a quick example. So let's say I want to use a counter called I, and that's a traditional thing to use for your loops, okay? And I'm going to use a for loop that says for I equals 0 to 9, okay? And then of course I have my next at the bottom, okay? Now what's going to happen here is when the program arrives at this line, it's going to proceed and go down below it, okay? And I is going to start out as being 0. So the first, and we can put whatever code we want on the inside. So let's say the code just said message box of I. Okay? So the first time the program comes down, I is set equal to 0, and then the message box spits out just the number I, which of course is 0. So we would see a message box that says 0. Then the code gets down to the next, and the program says, hey, I'm in a loop, I need to go back up to the beginning. And we come all the way back up here. And what's special now is that because this is a loop and because it's a for loop, it automatically, what we say is increments that I variable. And the I goes from 0 to 1. And then we go down again. Here we go to the message box. Now I is 1, so we get a message box that says 1. Then we hit the next, we go back up top. Okay, and because again it's a for loop, now I is going to be equal to 2. And we're going to keep going through, then I is 3, then I is 4, then I is 5, then I is 6, then I is 7, then I is 8, and then finally I is 9. And we'll go through with 9, and then when we get down here, the program will say, okay, I'm done. That's my last time. I went from 0 to 9. So you can kind of think of this loop as saying, all right, for I is equal to 0 all the way up to 9, redo this and make sure I goes up automatically each time. One other thing that you can add to this to make it a little bit more complicated, but also a little bit more versatile, is you can say not only is I equal to 0 to 5 in this case, but you can declare how much I steps up by. Okay, before I was saying that I steps up from 0 to 9. If you specify no step, that means that I will automatically go up by 1. Okay, but you can make it go up by whatever you want. So for example, for I is equal to 0 to 5, step 0.5 means instead of going 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's going to go 0, 0.5, 1, 1.5, and so on. Okay, so if I was to do the same code we had before, but with this step of 0.5, we would see a lot more message boxes. We'd see 0, then we'd see 0.5, then we'd see 1, then we'd see 1.5. Okay, and it'll go all the way up to 5 and then stop. Okay, so let me show you some more examples, and I'm also going to teach you a technique within Visual Basic about how to do debugging. And some of you may have seen me do this to your code when I'm trying to figure out what's going wrong, and it's going to become particularly useful in the context of loops. Here we go. So this is the first example that we're going to do. We're going to do output every integer between 0 and 250 as a single line in a text box. So here we go to Visual Basic, and I've got a form here that just has a big old text box. And for those of you interested, you can change the multi-line property of a text box to true, and that lets you have multiple lines on a text box like I have right here. In fact, I'm going to change this thing that says scroll bars to vertical. So we have a little vertical scroll bar on the side, which is nice. All right, now when I press this button, right, we're supposed to get 1 all the way up to 250 as individual lines on the form. So when the program is done, it should look like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on, all the way down to 250. All right, how are we going to make this happen? When they press the button, instead of typing textbox.text equals and then doing this all ourselves by hand, right? Unless you guys want to write 250 lines, let's use a loop to do it instead. So remember, we have our for loop. We start by typing for. And usually a good name for the variable to start out your for loop is I, okay? And people, that's just sort of tradition for programmers. If you don't like I, if you want to call it counter, if you like J, if you like something else, that's fine. But I like I, and I'm mostly going to be using I. So for I is, and then we say is equal to, in this case, we want to go all the way up from, was it 0 to 250? I don't know if it was 1 to 250. We'll start with 0. 0 to 250, okay? Because that's how many times we want to do this over and over again, right? And then I say, all right, each time that